What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, June 26, 2017, getting on to the end of the month. We're just a hair over a week away from Independence Day. We're going to be talking about that as we get into the beginning of next week here. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And unfortunately, we have to start today's broadcast with a very sad announcement, which is that Joyce Riley, host of the Power Hour, fellow traveler on the road to truth and freedom, passed away yesterday following a very long fight with cancer. And in the last couple of months, she'd been in and out of hospices, and people kept thinking maybe she'll pull back, maybe she'll pull back. And she kept broadcasting right up virtually to the end. And everybody in the independent media knows her. I was on her show, I don't even remember how many times. And so it is a little bit sad to see such an icon of the independent media pass away like that. So we're all thinking about Joyce and her family in these very, very difficult times. Okay, now the United States Supreme Court is nearing the end of the current term, and so we're starting to see a whole bunch of Supreme Court decisions coming on down. Perhaps the one that has got the most people upset is the Supreme Court upheld Donald Trump's travel ban, and they really didn't have much choice because it is written into Title VIII that the president can, by proclamation, ban certain groups of individuals coming to this country. And, of course, the open borders people out there saying, we'll sue, we'll sue. It's already gone to the Supreme Court. That's basically it. Now, another decision that came on down, I'm not so sure I agree with it, but basically this goes to this Trinity Church, which had applied for taxpayer assistance in dealing with some of their issues, and the state had refused, citing the separation between church and state. And the Supreme Court said, no, states cannot refuse financial aid to churches. And that does, unfortunately, open up that question of just how much separation there is between the church and state. This was a debate that was ignited not too long ago with George Bush's faith-based agenda, where they were using the churches as instruments of U.S. government policy, which is, in theory, not what they're supposed to be here. And, of course, last week they came on out, and this bears repeating, there is no hate speech exception to the First Amendment. The First Amendment is an absolute, and this attempt to get around the First Amendment by saying this is hate speech or that is hate speech will not fly. You can say whatever you want. Hopefully you'll have the responsibility to be saying things that are true. And obviously courtesy and respect should be part of the American discourse. But you have a right to come on out and express your opinion about things that are going on without the risk of having somebody come on in and say, oh, that's hate speech. We need to shut you up. You know, the humans aren't warming the world. And the carbon Nazis say, oh, that's hate speech. You're just a hater. Shut it all down. And, of course, we know what nation likes to use that hammer on free speech around the world. And, unfortunately, they have succeeded in many countries where you are not allowed to criticize the actions of the government of Israel without it being declared hate speech and silenced. And they were trying to bring that to the United States of America, and the Supreme Court just shot that down. The First Amendment right to freedom of speech is an absolute. So when we go on out there and tell you the truth about what's going on with all these corrupt politicians or how the CIA is running drugs to the American people, we are protected by that First Amendment, and it is a victory for the truth movement, for the peace movement. Now, there's another case that is been added to the docket of the Supreme Court. We're probably not going to hear a decision this term. It'll go into the next term. The Department of Justice is petitioning the U.S. Supreme Court to basically say that U.S. search warrants extend to data stored on foreign servers. Now, the current law, and this is based on international law, the U.S. government is allowed to serve warrants on things inside the United States of America, and the Justice Department wants to have the Supreme Court say, yes, U.S. warrants are valid in other countries on other people's servers, which I don't think actually compels those foreign governments to go along with it, especially given the recent history of U.S. spying gratuitously on people, stealing business secrets and so forth. So that one's going to go up before the Supreme Court next term. Now, unfortunately, the Trump administration has made a slight modification to the rules of engagement regarding drone strikes, because the previous engagement had a provision in there saying that there had to be a near certainty of no civilian casualties before the drone trigger could be pulled. Unfortunately, that has now been taken out, which basically means that there are going to be more civilian casualties from these drone strikes into countries that we're not technically at war with. All right, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, Seymour Hersh, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, has come out with a bombshell report, and you need to pay attention to this one. Apparently, before Donald Trump launched that Tomahawk cruise missile attack onto that Syrian air base, U.S. intelligence agencies said there was no evidence that Syria had used a gas attack on this town of Idlib. There was no support for it whatsoever, and Trump just ignored them and launched the cruise missile attack, which turned out to be an embarrassment when most of the cruise missiles actually missed the target. But this is a very alarming story, that even though there was no evidence of this attack on Idlib, even though the U.S. intelligence agencies, who are supposed to provide accurate information to the president for him to act on, said there was no evidence to support this, and Trump just went ahead and did it anyway. This is a very alarming development for a president who campaigned last year on the idea of pulling back from some of these foreign entanglements. Now, apparently, now that they're locked into Al-Tamf, the U.S. forces are locked into Al-Tamf because Syria pushed through to the Iraq border. They don't have a corridor to move northward on. And the U.S. military concedes they've lost the race to occupy southeast Syria. At the moment, they're just sitting there, holding on to the territory. And apparently, at some point, they're either going to be joined in another battle, or they're going to be airlifted out of there. Now, as you know, this is the beginning of Ramadan. And Syria, to celebrate, has gone ahead and released hundreds of prisoners of the U.S.-backed so-called moderate rebels. They just issued a blanket release and said, go forth, have a good Ramadan, and we hopefully will never see you again, which I think probably is going to be the result here. Meanwhile, there's been another incident down in the south near Quneitra, where Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and allied groups from the so-called Free Syria Army launched a large-scale advance against the Syrian Arab Army in the province of Quneitra. Now remember, these are both rebel groups. They're fighting each other now over control of the countryside. And apparently the Israeli Air Force conducted airstrikes on government positions in the province, claiming some projectiles landed in the Israel-occupied part of the Golan Heights, which technically is still part of Syria. And as usual, the shells hit dirt, no damage, no injuries, no deaths, but we'll just send the warplanes in there, targeting artillery pieces and 2 main battle tanks. This is, by the way, the second incident in 2 days where Israel's gone on in and just hauled off and attacked Syrian forces. And Syria is now issuing a warning to Israel of dangerous repercussions for aggressive actions. And again, the Golan Heights, although occupied by Israel, is still legally part of Syria. And Israel does not actually have any kind of a right to respond to artillery shells hitting empty dirt lots in the Golan. But it looks like while Syria is still weak, dealing with the U.S.-backed rebels, dealing with ISIS, that Israel may be about to make a move on the Golan to simply conquer it and say it's now ours. They've been talking about this for weeks. And my guess is it may well happen next week on the 4th of July holiday when Americans are not watching the TV news and they're out there with the hot dogs and whatever it is that they do on the 4th of July. Some places still very fortunate they're allowed to have fireworks, not here anymore, unfortunately. And by the way, a little program note. RBN will be broadcasting live on the 4th of July, Independence Day. At least that's what I'm being told now. It could change, but as of right now, the plan is we will be live. Now, a lot of dynamics going on in Saudi Arabia ever since Mohammed bin Salman took over as crown prince, which effectively puts him in charge of the country. Because his father, King Salman, is 81. He's not really all there, kind of like Nancy Pelosi. And so Mohammed bin Salman is actually functioning as the ruler of Saudi Arabia. Now, last week there was a story that the United States and Israel had been behind the scenes orchestrating this change in the crown prince. And apparently another Saudi prince, Khalid bin Farhan al Saud, who lives in Germany, says that the deal that came on down was Mohammed bin Salman has promised absolute obedience to the U.S. and Israel and doing whatever they ask him to do, which includes working to settle all the current residents of Gaza in the northern part of the Sinai. So that's the dynamics behind that. And now that you have that little bit of a backstory, all of a sudden we have Saudi Arabia saying they're not going to go soft on Putin anymore, and they're vowing to destroy the Russian forces in Syria in 3 days. With all those brand new weapons Donald Trump just sold them, which hopefully are going to work as advertised. But we're looking at a regional war. We're on the verge of a regional war. It's just, this rush to a global war. It's insane. It's terrifying to watch. So, and an even more alarming story. This is coming out of 12160. Apparently, Kiev has announced that U.S. combat troops are deploying in Donbass. There are now U.S. boots on the ground in the eastern part of Ukraine. It's just another provocation toward Russia, along with the escalation in Syria. This idea of having a war with Russia, it's absurd. It is absolutely, absolutely absurd. And apparently Moscow is upset because there was a U.S. Marines deployment in Norway, ostensibly for training exercises with the Norwegians, and the U.S. government, to nobody's surprise, has now decided they're going to extend that deployment for at least a year, possibly longer. And if you're my age, you remember this is how we got into Vietnam. Oh, we're sending advisors and trainers, and they won't actually be fighting anything. And, of course, 60,000 Americans dead later was the result of that one here. Now, according to secret documents obtained by a Russian intelligence service, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO mounted a campaign to try and prevent the Russian republics from merging. They wanted to break Russia into lots of little tiny parts that were going to be easy to bully, easy to push around. It didn't work, but that's the way NATO was thinking at the time. Another story, this is coming out of Zero Hedge. Apparently, in the last few days of his office, Obama ordered cyber weapons to be implanted into Russia's infrastructure. These are supposedly sleeper cyber weapons that can be activated on a single signal. Now, the official story is this was done in response to Russia's interference in our election, blah, 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 blah. But it looks like they're already out there trying to penetrate Russia's infrastructure in the eventuality that we actually go to war. So, and all this, of course, is very, very secret. You know, it's really interesting. Trump, about a week ago, asked a very cogent question. If Obama knew that Russia was interfering with the election, why didn't he do anything? And the excuses in response to that question are all over the place, including that Obama was doing all this stuff, but he had to keep it secret, that Obama didn't want to appear partisan by engaging with the Russians, and all of it's just, it's thin air. And it's amazing that they actually seem to think that most Americans are still believing any of this stuff. Even though the polls are now showing the American people are sick and tired of this Russia narrative. They're not buying it. They want it to go away. They're sick of hearing about it here. Now, apparently the United States is sending signals that they may choose to withdraw from, meaning violate, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. This is one of the many nuclear forces treaties. This one governs medium-range missiles, which are something that you would use on a battlefield rather than the big ICBM, let's hurl these at each other's countries. But apparently there's serious talk about how the U.S. may just pull on out of this and start building more of those. Russia is saying they will take retaliatory measures in response to the U.S. pulling out of the treaty. In other words, a new nuclear arms race. Now, a lot of this is coming from various bureaucracies and advisors, and there is obviously a schism inside the White House regarding Russia. And it's revealed by this story that came out of Newsmax. Trump eager for big meeting with Putin, some advisors wary. And reading between the lines here, it looks like Trump wants to meet with Putin to try and sort out some of this insanity. But then apparently many of the current administration officials are saying, don't talk to him. Don't talk to him. Maintain your distance. You don't want to get next to him. He's got cooties or whatever the excuse is. They're trying to keep their little Russia agenda going. Now, over in North Korea, they're trying to calm things down. South Korea is starting to make overtures to North Korea. The U.S. actually took the position South Korea did not have a right to talk to North Korea without the U.S. government's permission, and South Korea said, no, we don't need your permission. Well, we'll coordinate with you, we'll share information with you, but no, we don't need your permission to talk to a neighboring country. That would be like Germany coming on in and saying that we're not allowed to talk to Canada, to show you how absurd this is. And North Korea is saying the one area that is beyond the negotiation are the nuclear weapons. Because North Korea, which has already been the victim of one extraordinarily prolonged war, which they suffered greatly at the hands of South Korea and the United States, they want a deterrent, and that's the reason for having nuclear weapons, to deter other countries from invading you. That's really what it's all about. That was certainly the justification for all the tens of thousands of nuclear weapons built by the United States of America. Oh, we would never use these in a first strike. We have to have these to prevent other countries from striking us. And again, in all of history, there's only one country that's ever actually used nuclear weapons against another country, and that is the United States. If we want to curtail the nuclear threat, if we want a nuclear-free world, we ought to start with the one country that's actually done it. Meanwhile, Japan is ramping up the propaganda there. They've put together a new video urging citizens to seek shelter or just lie flat on the ground if North Korea launches a nuke at them. And I took a look at it. It seems to be about as useful as Bert the Turtle and Duck and Cover, which was all about reassuring the people they can survive a nuclear attack, even though they probably will not. All right, we're coming up here on a commercial break, and again, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, down in Israel, there's been another incident where olive trees belonging to the Palestinians have been destroyed by Israeli settlers. And, of course, the issue with an olive tree is that it takes 10 years from when you plant an olive tree to when you can get a saleable crop. And so every time they go on out and kill another grove of olive trees, it's an economic attack. And apparently on this one, somebody spray painted the Hebrew word for revenge on a stone. Revenge for what? Israel's taking their country. I mean, it really is ridiculous. Meanwhile, senior Israeli Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu believes the Israeli army should stop arresting Palestinians and execute them instead. It must execute them and leave no one alive, Eliyahu wrote in a Facebook post Tuesday. So, somebody remind me again, which is the religion of hate and violence? Because I'm getting awfully confused on this one. Now, over in Iran, Hassan Rouhani is condemning the siege of Qatar and basically saying it could easily destabilize the region, that Iran, the alliance between Qatar and Iran would actually benefit the region as well. And it has thrown the whole place into turmoil, which is leading to this article over in Journal Neo saying, has Washington lost the Middle East after Qatar? Meaning, have they lost control of the situation? And I would say that looking at what's going on over there, I think that's true. They're not in control anymore. They've kicked off all of these conflicts, all of this hostility between all these various groups. I mean, over in Syria, the U.S.-backed rebels are fighting each other now. And this was all about control of the oil and gas in the Middle East and what currency it was going to be sold for. And remember, back in, I think it was 2005, General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this whole program, saying that there was a list of countries the United States was going to invade and regime change, ending with Iran in 2008, a little off the timeline, obviously, with the specific goal of making sure that those oil and gas resources were only sold for U.S. dollars to prop up what's left of our economy. Because we don't have anything else. Don't have any manufacturing. Nobody wants our GMO. The only thing they've got left is forcing the rest of the world to use the U.S. dollar, generously loaned at interest by the Federal Reserve, or alternatively, these other countries can bring us manufactured goods and agricultural produce in exchange for these boxes of paper with colored ink all over them or the numbers in the computer. Now, turning over to Yemen, Saudi Arabia has conducted over 50 air raids on Yemen in just 24 hours. They're not delaying putting those new U.S. weapons to use and just bombing the heck out of the whole place. And they're pushing back because the Yemeni forces have been taking out Saudi-backed troops, weapons facilities, and vehicles. So the whole place, it's a war zone. There's no other way to call it right now. And the worst problem they're dealing with right now is this cholera outbreak. The United Nations has declared Yemen is dealing with the worst cholera outbreak ever. And they're talking about 200,000 cases. 1,300 people have died, a quarter of them children. And the big question here is this just a natural outbreak, the result of malnutrition and no hygiene supplies, or was this a biological attack? Because cholera has been used as a weapon of war in the past. We know how devastating it can be. Remember, following the Haiti earthquake, and the UN troops went on in there, and apparently one of them had cholera, and it just went all over the island, just wiped out a significant portion of the population. Is that what they're trying to do here? Now, the United States is getting ready to extend the war into the cosmos. More about this when we come back.
Yes, you're on the air.
Oh, okay, thanks. All right. Sorry about that. I got a little away from the clock here. So we're talking about how the U.S. is getting ready to push the front of war out into the universe. And so there's this article that came out of Sputnik News, U.S. preps for limitless war with proposed new space corps. And they're basically pitching it as a whole new military branch. So we'll have the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines, and the Space Corps. Now, the command structure has actually been in place for quite a while. It's called the Space Command. And up until recently, it's been mostly about taking care of surveillance satellites and things like that. So, now the problem I have with war in low Earth orbit is if we start blowing up each other's satellites, we're going to create a cloud of orbiting debris, which is going to make near-Earth orbit almost unusable to anybody. NORAD tracks things in orbit, and there's a lot of stuff up there. But they can't detect items below a certain size. And there have been incidents of debris causing damage to other satellites. There's at least one known case of two satellites actually colliding. So when you have an air battle and one plane shoots down another, everything blows up, then it comes on down to the ground, and that's the end of it. It's a completely different story in orbit, where you're going to have the debris. Some of it will go down, some of it will go up. The rest of it just goes into different orbits, and there's no way to track it. And so this is an incredibly reckless and dangerous thing for them to be doing up there. But if you look through history, you'll see that once a government gets into that state of mind of war, it's all about winning right now, and we don't care what happens 10, 15 years down the road. It's not our problem to deal with. Hence the use of depleted uranium munitions, which are not only harming the people living in the countries it's used on, it's harming our veterans who had to handle it. But again, victory or death, or blah, 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 blah. Now, as you know, one of the big stinks for the United States government was the torture that was uncovered at places like Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, and these people should have been held to account for what were obvious violations of international law, and they weren't. And as a result, there is a new torture scandal. And apparently, hundreds of men swept up in the hunt for al-Qaeda militants have disappeared into a secret network of prisons in southern Yemen, where abuse is routine and torture extreme, including something called the grill, where they literally tie this victim to a grill over a source of heat to basically slowly broil them, the way Jacques de Molay was done. So the U.S. government is still out here committing these war crimes. And then they claim that the rest of the world hates us for our freedoms, which is absurd. Now again, while I am opposed to the wars, I do feel that we owe a debt to our soldiers. And it turns out over in Los Angeles, there's a huge problem with homeless veterans. Veterans who are coming on back, they can't find jobs. The VA isn't taking care of them. And apparently the number of homeless veterans in Los Angeles jumped by 23% just this last year alone. Now that is shameful. That is absolutely shameful. And I'll tell you what's even more shameful. The veterans who are coming home, the government for a while, they've dropped this thankfully, but the government wanted to declare all returning veterans by default suffering from PTSD and therefore unable to avail themselves of their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Bring them home, disarm them, dump them in the street. That's how they're treating those people who go on out and wage war to make the bankers richer than they are right now. Now, turning to the domestic politics here, as you know, there's been a huge amount of attention on this dodgy dossier 2, if you will, that supposedly claimed Donald Trump and a couple of prostitutes were behaving very badly in a hotel in Moscow. And apparently the individual behind it, the company behind it, are trying to basically stay out of the public light, and they're stalling investigators. The Senate Judiciary Committee wanted to have this company come on in, Fusion GPS, because it's refusing to answer questions and provide records. Who was actually paying for all this stuff? At one point, we know the FBI was. But the dossier is just absolute fiction and fairy tale, and we need to find out who was the motivating force behind all of this. And here's where it gets interesting. we've established that this Russia dossier was faked by this pro-Clinton firm. And yet, with the exception of Fox News and the New York Post, the corporate media will not cover it. Which is, I guess, why the corporate media is going out of business right now. Now, Donald Trump, in an interview on Fox and Friends on Friday, basically referred to this whole Mueller investigation as ridiculous. And it is. They've got nothing there. It's just an excuse to churn out smear jobs against the president in the complicit corporate media, on and on and on and on, to try and sell the public that even though we don't have any proof, we're sure there's something out there. Now, the Russia narrative is collapsing. Polls are showing the majority of Americans are not buying into this. Polls are showing the majority of Americans just don't want to hear this anymore. They're sick and tired of it. Enough is enough. And here's where it gets really kind of weird, because with all this talk about, is Donald Trump really under investigation? Are they investigating? And now we have Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Loretta Lynch are all under FBI investigation right now, the same week. And you're not seeing much of that on the corporate media either. Now, Judge Napolitano was the exception, because he basically came on out and said that if emails surface between Loretta Lynch and former DNC chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz about furthering the Democratic interest surface, that's a felony offense. It's misconduct in office. So they're out there digging for that right now. Now, the good news is Representative Steve Scalise, his condition continues to improve. He's been upgraded from critical to fair condition. And the doctors are saying he's making good progress. And that really is a good thing. And everybody's pointing fingers, oh, it was this, it was that. Look at all the hateful rhetoric that we have seen in the corporate media this year. We even had Loretta Lynch was out there calling for blood in the streets. Well, Loretta, you got it. Maybe not in the streets, on a baseball diamond. And it has been absolutely shameful to see all these liberal icons, if you will, who are out there saying this was a good thing, they hoped this guy would die. They really seem to have lost touch with the real world. They're just caught up in their group think, their magic think, their fantasy that Hillary actually won and the world is a wonderful place. And much of the corporate media is going along with it. And the narrative is falling apart, and they're running the risk of literally triggering a civil war in the streets of America between the snowflake crybaby liberals and the rest of us. Washington Post is out there with all these stories. They're back to fanning racial tension. That's not what news reporting is supposed to be. News reporting is you give people the facts and they make up what it means. They decide what it means. Today's corporate media is, we're going to tell you what to think and forget about the facts. You don't need that. Now, CNN has had another embarrassment. Apparently, they ran a news item, again, about alleged ties between an ally of Donald Trump and the Kremlin. And as it turned out, they hadn't even fact-checked the story. And it fell apart, and they had to basically pull it from their website. They have not issued an official retraction. But apparently CNN's executive board is now saying there have to be new rules on the stories involving Russia. You have to go back to basic journalism 101. Check your facts, multiple sources, make sure that what you're putting out there is the truth. Now, in the old days of media, you had newspapers and magazines, which once they were on the newsstand, that was it. You can't take it back. One of the advantages of the Internet age is if corporate media puts out a story that's completely bogus, they can erase it from the website and act like it was never there to begin with. Now, over at NBC, Megyn Kelly's ratings are a disaster. This whole idea of luring her away from Fox and giving her a show where she's going to talk to interesting people. It's been an epic fail from the beginning. She wasn't able to goad Putin into saying anything that could be held against him. The episode with Alex Jones didn't make Alex Jones look all that good, but it did kick up a huge opposition that it appeared NBC and Megyn Kelly were legitimizing the independent media. And that is absolutely something. They're still trying to portray the independent media as just a bunch of guys, you know, in their spare bedroom, you know, with a bunch of cameras and computers. And yeah, that's where we are. And one of the things that really annoys me about all these paid liars who are still out there for the corporate media is how much money they are making to lie to you, while the independent media is just struggling just to get by. It really is insulting. Now, apparently, Stephen Colbert, following his little argument with Oliver Stone that CBS edited out, apparently he was on the talk show Evening Urgent, which is actually a Russian TV show. Apparently, he downed a couple of vodkas on the air and then announced he will be running for president in 2020. Yeah. Boy, wouldn't that be something? I remember when Reagan ran. And, of course, he'd already been governor of California. He'd been involved in politics for a long time. But the Democrats were just out there saying, an actor is president? I mean, you know, where are we going with this? And, yes, Reagan was an actor, and he was a good communicator. And he kind of got railroaded by George Herbert Walker Bush. And then, of course, he had his own deterioration issues later on in his administration. But this idea that we have movie stars want to run for president, Clooney wants to run for president, Cher wants to run for president, it really is absurd. And it does tell you just how disjointed and dysfunctional the U.S. government has become. All right, let's talk about the economy. Apparently, Italy is going to have to prop up two failing banks, or wind them up actually, for a cost of 17 billion euros. And this follows an emergency cabinet meeting yesterday, and basically they're going to split Veneto Banca and Banca Popolare di Vincenzi into good and bad banks, keeping some of the branches open. The good assets are being acquired by Italy's biggest retail bank, Intesa San Paolo, and the Italian government is basically going to bail out the bad assets. And I wish Italy had paid attention to what was going on over here following the 2008 meltdown of the mortgage-backed securities, because propping up the banks and using taxpayer funds to write off the bad debts didn't really fix the economy. In fact, it made things a lot worse for the ordinary American people. Now, here is a very alarming story. This is out of Blacklisted News. And I saw it in a couple of different places. Blacklisted is quoting from Forbes, and their writer, Brian Rich, basically pointing the finger at how the central banks have been buying up stocks like crazy to keep that stock market looking like it's still functioning. And it's, according to Brian Rich, it's gone too far. There's no way to pull back from it. It's beyond the point of recovery. And I understand how that works, because all of these banks, institutions involved in the plunge protection team, they're now holding vast blocks of stocks which are way overvalued, more overvalued than back in 1929. And the instant anybody starts to sell any of the stocks, the price will drop, and these banks could wind up instantly insolvent overnight, worse than AIG, worse than Lehman. Even the Bank of International Settlements is now in there saying that the next global financial crisis will hit with a vengeance. And they're absolutely right. You cannot run a national or global economy on debt. It simply will not work. Because by design of the central banks, the debt grows faster than the available money supply until the debt brings it down, and that's exactly where we are right now. Now, it's interesting. Earlier on Fox News, I was watching this TV commercial for one of these companies that are urging you to buy gold, buy gold, buy gold, and it really is always a good idea. But the commercial was talking about how gold is going up, and they had all these quotes from the financial press. Gold is headed up. Now's the time to buy it in. And apparently gold suffered a flash crash. Somebody dumped $2 billion of paper contracts on the market. And again, they use those paper contracts to keep the price of gold, for that matter silver, down. They don't want you liquidating your stock portfolio. They don't want you closing those savings accounts. And for those banks who played fast and loose with other people's gold, they're trying to buy back gold, and they obviously want a bargain basement price on that. So it's all rigging and all manipulation. It's hard to imagine there's still any honest component left anywhere in our economic banking system. It's all scams all the time. And that is so incredibly dangerous. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go take a telephone call from Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Glenn, are you there? Yeah, now I can hear you.
I am here. Okay, very good. Yeah, it was a big crashing noise when they hit the button there. You know, Mike, I think you may have stumbled upon the next major privatized space business.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're going to find Dyson spheres out in space, but they could end up finding some sort of maybe a Dyson low Earth orbit debris vacuum up there at some point. You know, big contract thing. They go up, collect money from all the different nations, and go in there and go up, suck up those missing spacesuit gloves and broken satellite parts and stuff like that. They kind of float around and just kind of vacuum things up.
Well, actually, Japan put up an experimental satellite to try and deorbit debris through magnetic induction. Unfortunately, it really didn't work. I had proposed a system to be deployed from right here in Hawaii, since we're so close to the equator, that would simply launch a rocket vertically, not into orbit, but into the path of an oncoming piece of space debris, and just pop out a little cloud of carbon dioxide or something that the debris would slam into and slow it down enough to bring it out of orbit. But you're absolutely right. At some point, especially if they go to this insanity of a war in low Earth orbit, at some point after that, somebody's going to have a new vehicle, like a new updated space shuttle, that's basically a garbage truck in low Earth orbit. And they're just going to have to do that because there are so many businesses that, and the military, who are dependent on access to low Earth orbit.
Right. Well, I guess they have anti-satellite missiles at this point, but I don't think they're like used on a regular basis because it's all about the debris clouds. In the one James Bond movie, Die Another Day, they tried to blow up the satellite with a big reflector that was shining down the, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and you had the rocket, the missile blown up, and you know, just even there, you think like all this debris. If anybody starts blowing anything up, that'll just create a cloud of debris. Each piece of which is like a bullet that could tear through a space station or the shuttle or its rocket or something.
There was one incident where one of the windshields on the shuttle had this almost an inch-wide crater blasted into it, and when they finally figured out what it was, it turned out to be a paint fleck off of another vehicle. I mean, that is how insane these velocities are. They're not up there in the same orbit traveling together in formation. The orbits are inclined because most of the space-based nations are north or south of the equator, and that's why you get these orbital inclinations. And where they cross, that closing velocity is just absolutely insane.
Yeah, exactly. It's just crazy stuff. So, but well, you know, if they're not inclined to clean up the Texas-sized island of plastic debris floating in the Pacific Ocean, they're probably not going to be going after that too much either.
Well,
clean up after ourselves
again, the island of plastic garbage in the Pacific isn't at this point causing significant economic harm. The loss of low Earth orbit, that would be a disastrous setback for our technology.
Right.
Anyway, Glenn, we got to take a break for station identification.
Take care.
We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And boy, this is a weird story here. Just came on in. I'm trying to get a confirmation on the date. But apparently a tornado has damaged 2 of the 4 U.S. doomsday planes, the flying command posts. And apparently they were stationed at Nebraska's Offutt Air Force Base. And apparently two of them, these are supposed to be, the nuke-proof aircraft, and two of them got damaged there. All right, we're going to go back to the telephones here. Mike in South Carolina. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, y'all. Nookie. You opened up with some information about the economy concerning GE's unfunded retirement, right around $31 billion.
Yeah, that was last week, I think.
Okay. Well, the CEO of GE is Jeff Immelt, who's announced his retirement in August.
Okay.
Jeff Immelt is also on the stock market plunge protection team.
Okay.
And he is also Obama's job czar. So having to fulfill all that information, I wonder what kind of retirement he's going to get when he severs his retirement with GE.
Oh, I'm sure it's a golden parachute to be admired.
He probably will have enough left over, maybe to open himself up a elastic shop or something like that.
Oh, okay. All right.
Anyway, it's interesting how informative, how when you get assigned into a position, you do your job. This is what happens, and he's also Jewish too, by the way.
Well, one of the things that I think angered a lot of people during the 2008 mortgage-backed meltdown were all these bankers who, at the most generous, were incompetent, if not criminal. They all got to walk away. Nobody went to jail, and they all retired on these really gargantuan retirement plans from their banks. And it's a big part of the wealth inequality problem in this country.
It's the main leading kosher game out here, and everybody seems to play it who's part of the membership tribe. So there's going to be some heads rolling here pretty soon. I'd like to see actually someone put some firing squads up and that. Let's get this.
Well, that's getting across a line that I don't want to cross on the show here. So, Mike, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to the economic news, Jim Rickards is now sounding a warning that the Federal Reserve is trying to set up a path for quantitative tightening after 9 years of quantitative easing policy. And this is going to be the evil twin of quantitative easing, which was used to ease monetary conditions when interest rates were already zero. In other words, they know they've overextended. They're working hard to conceal the inflationary damage that they've done. Now they're looking at a way to claw it all back, and I'll tell you right now, they won't be clawing it back from those top executives. It's going to be coming back from you. Higher food prices, higher gas prices, higher rent, higher whatever. Because Wall Street is just this big ratchet where the money flows one way and is never allowed to flow the other way. In fact, you could call Wall Street the money motel. Money goes in, but it never comes out. Now, we've been talking about the situation up in Illinois, and apparently it is deteriorating rapidly. And according to this article out of 12160, Illinois is about to declare bankruptcy, and there is already word out they may seize all the state pension funds to try and get out of this mess that they are in. And that is absolutely going to be horrible for all those state workers who worked their life for the state. They paid into the pension fund. That money is supposed to be theirs, and now it's just not going to be there. It's like people who've paid into Social Security all of their lives. The baby boomers are starting to retire, and all of a sudden they're talking, we have to cut the benefit. We have to cut the benefit. We just don't have it anymore. Oh, really? Where did it go? Well, had to pay for a war somewhere out there. Apparently, the Royal Bank of Scotland is moving part of their operation to India, which will result in the loss of hundreds of jobs in Scotland. And we've been talking about retail Mageddon. It's going on and on. Bed Bath & Beyond's CEO has just announced that as leases expire on roughly 100 of their stores, they will not be renewed. They're going to start phasing these stores out, pulling back from brick and mortar, trying to get back on the online business. And again, it looks really good, but they don't understand retail. Retail sales are all about instant gratification. You go on into the store, you pick something up, you hold it, you see it's a quality product, and you turn over your money, they give you the product, you go home. Everybody's happy. If you have spent a lot of time ordering online, you know that you actually don't know what quality the product is until it shows up. And sometimes it is too late. That actually happened recently where Claire decided to buy some clothing online. And boy, did it look good on that website. And when we got it here, it's a dust rag now. Okay, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Goldman Sachs is now saying that the oil crash is unlikely to continue. They're hoping that oil prices will turn around and bring profitability back to the oil sector. When oil prices were going up a little while ago, it encouraged many of the fracking companies to restart their operation. Many of them had shut down during that poorly thought out oil price war with Russia, which actually backflashed and caused a lot of harm here. So Goldman Sachs is out there. They're bullish on oil here. And here's where it gets really interesting. You know, the United States has been out there saying, we sanction this, we sanction that, here a sanction, there a sanction, everywhere a sanction, sanction, E-I-E-I-O. Now all of a sudden Germany is talking about sanctions, this time against the United States, over some of the hostility building over tariffs on German imported cars, which, by the way, are very good cars. So this might actually be the final straw for that push for the transatlantic union. Now, just in case you're feeling unfairly put upon, the reality is there are billionaires who are in trouble. They've overextended themselves. They can't meet their payments here. And apparently there's an area in New York City called the Billionaires Row. And apparently there's a luxury condo at Manhattan's 157 Tower. And this 6,000 square foot full floor penthouse sold for $50 million in December of 2014, making it the 8th priciest in the building. There are 7 more that actually sold for more than that. And unfortunately, it's now going into foreclosure. And maybe some of these billionaires will start to realize that you can't run an economy based solely on debt. Sooner or later, that debt catches everybody. And if you think of our economy as a giant pyramid, we have been seeing the suffering and the privation and the hunger and the poverty at that lower part of the pyramid, but it's starting to work its way up. We're starting to see middle-class people in trouble, upper middle-class people in trouble. Now we're starting to see people getting near that top. They need to look at what's going on and objectively deal with it, or it is all going to crash. Now, getting on over to the European Union, more and more Europeans are thinking that it's time to get out of the EU. And the apparently polls are showing that several countries are now seriously considering getting out of the EU. They're waiting to see what difficulty Great Britain gets into trying to sever that connection. It's very obvious Brussels is trying to hang on to them. And they're keeping a very wary eye on that. But we could see the European Union breaking up, and oddly enough, when the EU first started getting into trouble, and I kept thinking, it's that European Central Bank, and it's driving everybody into poverty. The richer nations, like Germany and Great Britain, are being plundered to prop up the poorer member nations of the EU, and they really didn't like it. But at this point, it does seem to be that refugee problem that is just creating all this hostility all across Europe. And it's amazing. People on the ground, people in the local communities are saying this has gone on far enough. And you have Brussels up there, which is clearly out of touch with the pulse of the European people out there saying, you will allow more refugees in. We've got to bring more refugees in here. We will fine you if you refuse the refugees. And I think that is a big reason why more and more of these European member states are saying it's time to cut the tether with Brussels. They're not interested in what's good for us. They're following the globalist agenda. And I think pretty much everybody who's not on George Soros' payroll is pretty much fed up with this globalism nonsense. Story out of Sputnik News. First things first, the European Union needs to care for its own interests, not those of the United States. We're hearing that from a lot of places all over Europe. They're getting scared. They're seeing this obvious rush toward an eventual war between NATO and Russia. And they don't want to have that because they know it's going to be fought right on their front lawn. And again, if you spend any time in Europe and you travel around there, you can see the scars all over the place from World War I and World War II. Remember the trench warfare in France? Some of those trenches are still there. They're a little eroded, but you can still see them. You can see them in Google Earth. When I was working in Europe back in the mid-'80s, there were still these historic architectural buildings that were still being rebuilt. They hadn't gotten to them all after World War II. They see that every day with their own eyes. And they're really opposed to that. All right, let's get on back to the USS Fitzgerald. There is a very obvious online propaganda campaign trying to sell the idea that the Philippines attacked the USS Fitzgerald twice because they're evil and Duterte hates drug dealers and therefore we need to send military forces in there to kick Duterte out there and put in a U.S. puppet who's a little more forgiving of drug activity. What we're hearing from the other side, and by the way, there's no official response from the U.S. Navy as to exactly what happened. All of this talk about attack by the container ship is all online. What we're hearing from the owners of the ACX Crystal is that they were trying to send warnings to the Fitzgerald. And they were signaling with flashing lights. And apparently, according to the captain of the ACX Crystal, the Fitzgerald suddenly steamed on a course to cross its path. What I think happened is that the bridge crew thought they were going to be able to get in front of that cargo ship before it showed up and just head on their way. But again, this is a violation of the law of the sea. Because if you are a ship's captain, if you have your master's papers, or even if you don't have your master's paper, there is a hierarchy of rights of way. And those big super tankers and those container ships, they are right at the top because they can't turn very quickly. They can't slow down very quickly. Everybody has to get out of their way. I think somebody tried to hot dog around the front of the container ship and they miscalculated, and that's why the Navy is staying silent on this one. Now, okay, let's talk political correctness. There's a lot of nonsense out there here. Over at Essex County Community College in New Jersey was this professor, Lisa Durden. And apparently she was interviewed on Fox News, where she came on out with a comment about, you white people are angry because you couldn't use your white privilege card. And apparently the community college received numerous complaints about this interview with Tucker Carlson, and she has now been fired. And I'm sure a lot of people of all colors are out there saying, I don't want this, teaching my kids. And we have seen so many of these statements from so-called educators about, what was one of the other ones that came out over the weekend? White women should have abortions. It's time to get rid of the white population. They're trying to be racist in reverse. They're still trying to fan up a race war. Is Hillary in her lair still dreaming of a race war in this country that makes her president? As I mentioned earlier in the show, even Washington Post is back to pounding on the race card. Oh, the racists hate each other and everything. No, actually we don't. It's all bought and paid for manufactured propaganda. It's called divide and conquer. And again, go back to the 1960s and the COINTELPRO program, where the U.S. government, specifically the FBI, intentionally fanned up race hatred to prevent the American people from uniting together in opposition to the war in Vietnam. And they're doing it again. The federal government understands they're losing control of the American people. The American people aren't buying the lies anymore. They're not believing what they see in the corporate media. And we're building to a crisis point. And the government's trying to come up with something where they can somehow maintain control, because that is always the top priority of any ruling party. Maintain control, doesn't matter what else goes on. Get rid of the Constitution, have to kill people, just maintain control. Okay, apparently the TSA is out there sticking their nose in our business yet again. And apparently the TSA is now testing a new procedure where when you go into the gate at the airport and you already have to take your laptop out, put it in a separate bin. Now the TSA wants you to do that if you're carrying any books or other paper materials. You know, a magazine, book, and we're not really sure why. Maybe they're trying to make sure that we're not reading that double plus ungood, un-American constitutional stuff. But that's the new thing. Now, the good news is they did try it briefly in Missouri and California, and it caused so much problems, they just knocked it down. They just quit. But they're going to come back with this. They just want to spy on everything that we do. And, of course, it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. This is an unreasonable search and seizure. You don't need to know what books I'm reading. You don't need to know what magazines I bought at the kiosk before I got on the plane. This is just authority for the sake of authority. All right, let's talk about some computer stuff. The cybercrime hacking is totally out of control now. And apparently Virgin Media is now telling 800,000 of their users to change their passwords over a hub hacking risk. And apparently they found out hackers could get into the hub and get the credentials. And by the way, there's another one going around right now where you get an email saying, you're a loyal Amazon customer, click here for your $100 bonus card. Don't click it. More malware, more malware, more malware. And apparently this router hack risk is not limited just to Virgin Media. So it is a mess. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And down in Florida, speaking of the TSA, apparently a 22-year-old TSA worker, Alexander Shea Johnson, has been fired from the TSA and arrested. Apparently helped himself to a big chunk of cash in one of the passengers' bags that he was doing the enhanced screening on. So good for that. All righty, let's see. Let's take a couple more phone calls here. Fred in Iowa, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy, Mike. Yeah. What you said at the first of the break about learning and listening to RBN, I will readily admit, and I am grateful for. I have learned a great deal from RBN, and I appreciate that immensely.
Well, thank you.
Now, and I mean it. And what you said, Michael Herzog, which I hold in very high regard, he wrote it up. And I want Mike to stay on the Herzog. Okay, where I live in this small community, there's numerous Russians. Unfortunately, I only know how to say good day, so I need an interpreter, the younger people. What I have found is they are just like us.
Yes.
They don't slaughter and rape and murder and torture children and women. And I'm sure that's common throughout the world. Okay. You speak of division. RBN, a lot of shows, and I would assume mostly through ignorance or normalcy bias or cognitive dissonance, they perpetuate division and strife because all we hear is Jew, 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 black, 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 white, white, white. I am so sick of that. Now, that's on RBN. Now, to reiterate what I have learned being a listener on RBN for 3 years and 4 months, I am grateful for it. But when any time a caller calls in that's a little controversial or doesn't speak what the host believes, well, they're given short shrift or taken off the air, or Mike didn't. And that's saying, well, you go to hell, what I believe, I'm going to believe. Well, I would imagine or think or believe all the hosts are very intelligent people.
Mm-hmm.
Subjects they know about to the extent that they believe with their own beliefs, and we all have our biases, are, what they think, what they believe. But I would like to say what I think and the reasons for it, the why. And only RBN can be improved over that. I don't want to see RBN go off the air, claiming he's, but it needs to be that each host, like all of us, needs to look at ourselves and try to determine and face, we all have faults. But if you become aware of them, you have the choice or the alternative as an individual to correct them or leave them as is. Now, I could yap on for another 30 hours, but, Michael, thank you for the time. And, I'm going unless you want to ask me some questions.
No, that'll be fine, but I am going to respond to what you said here. First of all, the important thing about RBN, it does not exert any control over the content of the various programs. The hosts are free to basically decide what they're going to talk about, what they're not going to talk about. Nobody's ever come to me and say, please cover this story or please don't cover this story. We do have to exercise some editorial control over callers. Part of that is making sure that they're not going to say something that will get us into trouble with the FCC. And I will give you some other reasons when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And in response to Fred from Iowa, let me lay out basically the guidelines that we use. We do have to exert editorial control over the phone calls. First and foremost, anybody who calls in and just wants to shout abuse at us, they're going to get dropped. Second of all, if they persist in using obscene language, we have to cut them off in order to protect our on-air affiliates. And I understand that the FCC rules were changed recently where the radio stations are not held liable for the use of the bad words, but we still have to maintain those standards. Then there are people who call into the show to spout absolute nonsense, to make us look like we're silly and kooky, and these are the people who call in about UFOs and Bigfoot and all the rest of the other stuff. And you need to understand, I come from a science background. So if somebody calls on in who is trying to make a claim that I know is scientifically impossible, we're basically going to deal with that one. And probably the most important rule of all, we don't allow callers into the show to paint with a broad brush. As Fred himself said, we don't talk about the Jews, we don't talk about the blacks, we don't talk about the Hispanics. We talk about the crimes of the government of Israel. We talk about individual actions of certain people involved in domestic politics here, and that's basically the rule. We talk about the actions of individuals or governments, and we don't come on out here and just start painting a broad brush over everybody. And those are the rules. And if those rules do not make you happy, then, well, I'm not going to apologize. I think they're good rules. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Jerry in Chicago. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you, Michael, very much for taking my call. Three things I wanted to touch on, and Fred reminded me that you put out a very good commercial for RBN, and I have learned a lot in the 4 years that I've been listening to RBN. And as of last Tuesday, it was 3 years since I gave my first donation to RBN.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Okay, but I wanted to also mention something about a little bit of familiarity. Maybe I'm a conspiracy crazy nut, but the USS Fitzgerald, with all of its technology that was aboard that ship, it kind of sounds like the USS Donald Cook to me.
Well, I understand that, but again, based on these statements that we're getting from the captain of the Crystal, to me it looks like the Fitzgerald violated the right-of-way rules and just wanted to get ahead of the container ship and dart across, and they misjudged it. At this point, and again, we have absolutely no official comment from the Navy. All we have are the tracks for the Crystal itself on that ship tracking system. And by the way, for some reason, the Fitzgerald had their system turned off. So we don't know exactly where they were on the map. And I think somebody just screwed up horribly on the bridge of that ship, and it's certainly not the first time. Like I said, we had the Greenville that sank that Japanese training vessel and killed all those kids some years ago. These things do happen. And that's what it looks like to me.
Well, now that you mentioned the Greenville, wasn't there a senator on board as an unexpected guest or something like that? And he wanted to see one of these surfaces where the whole ship pops out of the water, and he didn't care what was on the surface.
Well,
okay,
he didn't need to. It's up to the captain to make sure that the surface is clear. And again, there are specific areas marked on the maritime charts where submarines surface or submerge, and they do that there, and the other boats know to stay on out. So again, it looked like they did this pop-up. And yes, it was one of these little cruises where the Navy will occasionally go on out, and they'll invite the public on board. And I've actually, Claire and I have been out on an Arleigh Burke twice. Once we were actually part of a choir during Christmas. And they are amazing ships. My favorite room is the sonar. But again, collisions between ships are a regular event. It looks like that may have been what happened to the Kursk. But again, the only information we're really getting is from the captain of the Crystal, who was saying they were trying to warn the Fitzgerald off that the Fitzgerald was paralleling them, and then all of a sudden turned across their bow. And again, 2 o'clock in the morning, people not all that awake, misjudged where the front of the ship was.
Okay, well, I just want to remind the listeners that the USS Maddox, the captain of it, and the USS Liberty I think they held their stories, and they didn't tell the truth. So we might not have any of the truth at this point. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.
All
Love
right.
your show.
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go on that one. Certainly, when the Navy has a major goof, whether it's the fact that there were no torpedoes chasing the Maddox, or the Liberty was attacked by Israel, or TWA-800 was accidentally shot down in the test of Aegis CEC, they go into action immediately, and everybody's ordered to silence with all kinds of very dire threats what could happen to them. All right, Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Mike. I just wanted to clue your listeners in on another scam that came by me on Saturday afternoon, actually Saturday morning. My wife was in the house, and I heard her. I was so proud of her. She's actually caught on what's going on with these scams, computer scams, people calling in telling there's a computer virus on your computer. How they would know that, I don't know. But basically how it went was it was funny. We want to get into your computer and fix this computer problem. Of course, she knew it was a scam, so she said, how do you know there's a virus on my computer? And he said, well, we're with Microsoft, this and this. And then she said, I could hear her, she was saying, take me off your phone call list. Please take me off. We're unlisted. How'd you get my number to begin with? Mm-hmm. And he wouldn't answer. And she said, get me off your phone list right now. And he came back. It was funny because he said, no, no, no. And I said, well, there you know right away this is a scam, because nobody legitimate from the corporation of Microsoft would talk that way to a potential customer. So we knew it was a scam right off the bat, but he was insistent that he would not take you off this phone call list. It was hilarious. She put him in his place, though.
Well, I'm glad she did, but I mean, this epidemic of scammers across our entire society, not just computers, but other things as well, it's totally out of control. And it's almost like scams are the only thing holding the economy together at this point, whether it's Wall Street scam, computer scam, corporate media scam. It's almost like there's actually no core of the country left on which we could, use as a foundation to try and make things better.
Well, I agree. When I see that commercial for LifeLock, I'm thinking, why is my government not catching these criminals because they're too busy looking at you and I, what we're doing? And, it's just like an industry that's just, it's job security for these people in the industry. There's no reason, there's no wanting on the government side to catch these cyber criminals, and an industry that just popped up out of nowhere because the government won't do their job.
Well, it's been around for a while. I mean, computer security, and yes, LifeLock's been around for a few years. But again, you're absolutely right. It's all called stimulating the economy. We're going to, set up a circumstance in our country where you will be forced to buy things you otherwise would not want at all. And we're seeing this attitude of the government forcing us to buy things, whether it's vaccines, GMO, and so forth. And it is hideously abusive. We're losing our freedom to live our lives our own way. But in terms of the computer side, you need to remember much of the exploits being used by the cyber criminals came from the U.S. government itself, NSA and CIA. And not a word of regret from that. In fact, if anything, they're out there saying, gosh darn those whistleblowers, they've given away our very best tools.
Right. Hey, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks an awful lot. Let's go to John in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I am a listener for a long time. I am in Army Special Forces, 18 Echo Communications Sergeant.
Okay.
I've been in the Army for 10 years and in Special Forces for 5. I've been to Afghanistan 3 times, and that's actually the reason I'm calling is because I heard about the move to put 6,000 more troops there, which I think is a really bad idea.
I agree.
I was there for a year in 2011, and I didn't think we were there for a good reason then. I was there during the surge when we had 120-plus thousand troops there. Then I was there again in 2015, and then again last year. I actually participated in a major battle in Bhagwan over there last year. But the point I wanted to make is, as someone that's been over there, I really don't even know why we're there still. I recently had a really good friend that I grew up with overdose on heroin. I hadn't talked to him in some years before that happened, but it was very sad to go to his funeral and deal with his whole family that were very upset about it. So, yeah, I really do think that there's a connection to the opium drug trade over there for the reason why we're there. So, yeah, I think it's a really bad idea to send more troops there. And Donald Trump ran on a non-interventionist foreign policy, and it seems like he's turned his back on everything that he promised during his campaign as far as foreign policy goes.
Yeah, he absolutely has here. Now, before we go any further, first of all, thank you for your service to our country, as misguided as it may have been, and that's not your fault. Second, I'm glad you made it back in one piece here. But, yeah, one of the reasons we're in Afghanistan is a supply of opium to the American drug lords, and it really is out of control because there's this article over in Philadelphia. Apparently there is a half-mile stretch of train tracks called simply the tracks, and it is currently littered with about 500,000 used syringes and piles of trash because apparently this is where the junkies go to shoot up after they buy the opium from the surrounding neighborhoods. And it really is a horrible thing when you have a government that is profiting off of these illegal drugs. I'm going to ask you if you got a chance to catch History's Channel's America's War on Drugs.
Yes, I have. I was actually watching that series recently.
Oh, yeah. Isn't it a good one?
The whole how the CIA started the cocaine industry in America and brought crack to the west part of the country. That was pretty crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy, and we're still living with the end effects of it. It's never really stopped. Nobody's ever really stopped it. The war on drugs is the war on the competition's drugs.
Yes, and that's another thing that Donald Trump ran on was to legalize drugs, legalize marijuana, and that's another thing that he's turning his back on.
Yeah, Sessions certainly is on the warpath on legalized marijuana because big alcohol doesn't want legalized marijuana. Big tobacco doesn't want legalized marijuana. The pharmaceutical companies don't want you to have marijuana, but they're getting ready to basically take the THC and modify it into a patentable prescription medication, the same way they took valerian root, made a change to the molecule, and called it Valium. And it's all about making money. You're not allowed to grow your own food anymore, not allowed to grow your own medicine, you're not even allowed to decide what medical treatment you're going to get. Every time there's a new iteration of Obamacare or Trump care, more and more of your freedom to choose your own medical care is taken away from you. Certainly in the area of vaccines, it's become very obvious.
Yes, and actually my dad is a cancer patient, and he's going through radiation therapy right now, and I tried to convince him not to do the treatment and to go a more natural route for medicine, but he listened to his doctor and not me. So.
Well, that's a shame. I mean, I lost my mother to cancer, and they gave her the double whammy, radiation and chemo, and to this day, I don't know if she actually died of the cancer or of the cancer treatment.
Yeah, well, another thing, real quick, that I wanted to talk about was, as someone that's listened to your show, I used to listen to Alex Jones' show for probably about 10 years, and when I stopped listening to him about a year and a half, 2 years ago, when he completely went pro-Donald Trump and pro-Israel, and that I still don't understand, so I had stopped listening to his show. But the thing I wanted to talk about, though, is the connection between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton before he started running for president. She sat front row in his wedding. I believe their daughter shared an apartment in Manhattan. It seemed like they were best friends. And then Bill called him supposedly on the phone the day before he announced his campaign. And now that he's become president, there doesn't seem to be any indication that his administration is going to go after her for crime.
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed about that as well. I think we're seeing the American people realizing that the government is not interested in dealing with high-level corruption. And right now, the American people need to see that's actually happening. The American people need to see some arrests made and some of these people go to prison, or they're going to lose all trust and confidence in what remains of our federal government. And Donald Trump needs to realize this, because if he continues to simply ignore some of these campaign promises he made, then he's going to be a one-term president.
Yeah, totally agree. And something that I wanted to point out, though, also is the whole Pizzagate thing, the pedophile ring, that was big news, and now no one's talking about it at all. And when he first swore into office, there was a couple of weeks where there was news saying that he was going to go after those people, but there hasn't been any high-level arrests. You know, the Podesta brothers were outlined in a sketch from an eyewitness saying that they abducted a child. They're still walking free.
Hang on. That was actually two sketches of the same suspect, and those sketches are never, they're never really solid identification. My biggest upset with, well, not my biggest, but one of my big upsets with Donald Trump was the Vaccine Safety Commission that he set up with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in charge of it. We have not heard a word from them as to what they are doing. And again, if Trump continues to disappoint the American people, he's going to be a one-term president. And I have to be very honest right now. In terms of 2020, the only way I would support Donald Trump for re-election is if Hillary runs again. In which case, you know, I will grit my teeth and I'll go back to supporting Donald Trump. Yeah, the escalating wars, I mean, we may not even get to 2020 with an election if we get a nuclear war.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm actually getting out. I have a couple months left. I'm actually vacuuming my house right now, getting it ready to sell.
All right, good for you. All right, John, we're going to let you go. We're going to take a break for commercials. Back with more phone calls. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Before we go back to the phones here, apparently CNN has now officially retracted that story linking an ally of Donald Trump to a Russian bank and an FBI investigation into alleged ties between the campaign aides and Moscow. Meanwhile, of course, you have all of the collusion between Hillary and Russia, the Uranium One deal, and nobody wants to look at that. It is amazing how biased the corporate media is. All right, let's take some phone calls. Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Good to hear you today.
Thank you.
I was curious. I sent you that link on ISIL Target Russia. I was wondering if you've been able to watch that yet.
No, I have not been able to look at that yet.
Okay, it's an Al Jazeera documentary. The military boy that you just talked to, I think he should watch that too. But anyway, it highlights that ISIL's revenges against Russia. And I thought this was kind of interesting because in the video it shows how ISIL is working with the Taliban. Mm-hmm. And as a flashback, if you remember, Joe Biden said that the Taliban are not enemies of the U.S., and that statement was confirmed by the White House. Anyway, this push into Russia, it seems to be, in other ways, two forked prong type deals to come into the back door of Russia there.
Well, we know that there was a campaign of domestic destabilization which ended when Putin ordered all of these non-governmental organizations that are being run by George Soros to just get the heck out.
Mm-hmm. You also remember, too, I forget how many videos there are now, but it's a massive heroin addiction in Russia where, of course, this is meant to destabilize people so they can't fight, you know.
That's exactly right. That's one of the uses of heroin. Get a nation drug addicted, it can't function economically. What's really absurd is our government's actually doing it to our own country.
Right. Well,
maybe that's how they're going to. Maybe that's going to hold off a revolution. Just get us all stoned.
Okay, I had another thing for you. You know, since you just had that little veteran guy on there, and I appreciate his service, and I'm sorry, condolences for his friend there. But I look at the way the French did in World War II, where they formed their French resistance, and I kind of I don't care if people like the way it sounds or anything like that, but in forming a resistance to occupation, you know, I find that no different than those patriots in Iraq and Syria and stuff that are building a resistance, and unfortunately where IEDs and stuff are used to destroy the occupying Army's forces. And it just seems to me like this is a repeat, except it's not glorified just as much as insurgents is used or support or.
Well, yeah. There's a lot of double standards. Every time the U.S. makes gains in Syria, they call it, "We've liberated this city." No, you're conquering the place. Right. If they're working for us, they're freedom fighters. If they're working against us, they're terrorists. Keith, do you have more? Do you want to stay on past the break?
No, I'll go ahead and let you go because I see you're busy today. You have a good day and best of luck, too, okay?
Thanks an awful lot, Keith. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go right back to the telephones here. Dick in Idaho, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Hey, I woke up this morning with an idea that came to me, and I'm crediting it to listening to your program for many years.
Okay.
But I know that your program and those like it are causing the average citizen to rethink what is important and what really matters. Mm-hmm. Evidence is what happened November of 2016. And the following idea is a result of me listening. You know that you are over the target and getting a lot of flack because of your focus on the money junkies. The independent media needs a calling card vis-a-vis a holiday where everybody pays with real money, coins being about the only thing left. The independent media and we the people would designate like a national coin day or a legal tender day, so that from the beginning of the year until, let's say, April 14th, the day before Tax Freedom Day, everybody saves their coins. Then on April 14th or some other designated day, we only use coins to buy goods and services. Mm-hmm. And then the next month or 6 month or a year interval, we do another legal tender day +1. And this would be sending a message that the people want real money. And the independent media could freely promote this as a public service announcement. And it could go across the board. It wouldn't have to be just RBN. You know, if the people out there could call in the other, news sources, the independent, because that's what people are turning to now. And there was just a thought that came to me this morning.
Well, it's an interesting thought, and if we still had coins that had intrinsic value, that would definitely be a good thing. Unfortunately, we don't. Whether it's the legal tender paper or the coinage, there's no intrinsic value. It's still all Federal Reserve funny money. But at some point in the future, I think we are going to see an American people who are responsive to the idea of a general strike, of just staying home for a week, not going to work, not filling out paperwork, not going to the bank, just stay home for an entire week. Gandhi used this to tremendous effect in India when he was trying to get Great Britain to get the heck out.
Yeah, whether it's salt or whatever, if we just had some means to show that, we are, we're sick and we're mad as hell.
Yeah, we are, and we're not going to take it anymore.
Yep. Hey, I love your show. Keep it up, Michael.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here and switch over to Jack in Georgia. Aloha, Jack. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Good show.
Thank you.
Quick question. There is a bill requiring citizens to report the cash they have at home.
Yes.
And there are rumors that it passed in the Senate.
I don't know that it's actually passed, but and that's kind of weird because, again, The origination clause of the Constitution is the bill has to pass in the House because it's a revenue measure. Then the Senate votes on it. But I'll take a look at it here because, let's see, Senate 1241. Let's see if there's any headlines on it. Okay, I'm not seeing anything just yet.
I saw it in some kind of a not very reliable place, but I wonder, some general questions on that. Have you seen any limits on that? Did they put any limit on the amount of money or
Well, basically,
minimum?
the threshold is $10,000. If you have more than $10,000 and you do not report it to the government can seize absolutely everything that you own.
Has that been applied in any other countries that you're aware of?
No, I have no idea, but certainly it is. It's a very obvious move. They're trying to find some way for the American people to keep their money in the banks so the banks can use it to play their little scammer games. And I think this is a stepping stone to the so-called cash-free society. But again, when you look at all the recent cases where the cash registry, the electronic readers at supermarkets quit, people can't pay for their food, there is a compelling need for people to be able to have cash to conduct business during blackouts, during computer outages and the rest of it. This idea of making us dependent on these bank computer systems, which are not reliable, they're wide open to hacking and rigging. It is something that serves the interest of the bankers and its potential to cause tremendous harm to the general population, but they really don't care.
Right. I'm not sure the population is aware of that, or they keep talking about convenience, especially the young people. They don't understand anything. What may happen to them if they're cashless, or young people are not aware of this, of the dangers.
Yeah.
In Congress, I mean the U.S. Congress, what do you think will be the position of the various parties? Can you take a guess, or what? I mean, will there be reaction or pushback, or?
I would like to see it. I mean, obviously, this bill is a major threat to cryptocurrencies, which represent a store of, well, not necessarily a store of wealth, but represents a currency operating outside the banking sector. See, the actual law is that the Federal Reserve note is legal tender for all debts. There's no law that says it's the only one you can use. And during hard economic times like the Depression of the 1930s, certainly during the Civil War, local communities would print and issue their own currency. And it was perfectly legal of them to do that. And now they're trying to take that away, where they're going to make that Federal Reserve note the only currency you are allowed to use in order to cement your slavery to the private central bank.
Right. There was something similar happened in the early 1930s in Austria. I forget the name. Localities had their own money. Anyway, there is a lady has her own blog, Catherine Austin Fitz.
Oh, yes.
She knows a lot about money. I think it's a suggestion to invite her, and also this guy Gerald Celente.
Yes, we've had them both on the show.
Yeah. She knows about bitcoins and all that. She knows about the flow of money like very few people. And maybe you can ask her about this bill. I think they call it civil forfeiture or something like that.
Well, the name is basically couched in terms of stopping terrorists. But again, look at how all the money control laws so far have not been a hindrance to the CIA's drug running. Any bill that is passed by the U.S. government, there will be some kind of a mechanism or a loophole where criminals are still going to be able to do what they want. All of these laws are here to constrain the law-abiding citizen, and the criminals are always going to find a way to around it. Look at all, like the Panama Papers, BCCI, all these banks that are caught laundering money and transferring it for the criminals.
Right. I mean, I would think there's a lot of people in Senate and Congress who have reasons not to have such a law for their own dirty reasons. I mean, for their money here and there and all over the world and cash. I mean, they wouldn't welcome such a bill.
I think that would probably be the case, but you know, Congress does write exemptions for itself, and they could easily do. Yeah.
It would be too obvious, too shameless. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Rick in Arizona. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mike. Yeah, as far as the economic collapse, you know, every time I hear that, I think of Eustace Mullins. He was on a show like this one day, and somebody called in and said, Eustace, when is this shell game going to crash? How long can they keep this shell game going? And Eustace said, as long as they got the shell.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You know, they've been talking about the crash of China's economy for 20 years, and nothing seems to ever percolate there. And as far as the last caller goes, as far as the cashless society, they may take the $100 bill out of circulation and see how that flies. I don't know if it will.
They're already talking about that. They're talking about taking both the 100 and the 50 out of circulation. So if you're out there dealing in drugs, you got to have a big old sack of paper notes that is going to be very visible to drug enforcement officers.
Yeah, but, you know, look, the people are getting what, I don't say they're getting what they deserve, but I don't see a ferocious resistance from people. I see people staring into their phones, and I think if they want to confiscate your money, I mean, I don't see them I see them getting away with it. There was a guy...
They've been getting away with it for years, called civil forfeiture. The police are stealing more from the American people than all the muggers and burglars and robbers put together.
There was a guy that got caught with a joint somewhere in the Midwest. He had $89,000 in cash on him. He claimed he was a poker player, which he could have been.
Yeah.
But one joint, now the feds are going after the money.
Yeah.
Under civil forfeiture. So I mean, the guy, I don't know, but I mean, I just don't see a ferocious resistance out there against anything, Mike. I'm sorry.
Well, how much ferocious resistance did you see before the collapse of the Soviet Union?
Well, I mean, it just collapsed economically, I guess.
That's exactly right. Well, it collapsed both economically. It collapsed economically from debt, and it collapsed politically because even though the Soviet citizens were not out there with torches and pitchforks, they knew that government had been lying to them, and they were not going to line up to try and support the Soviet government and save it from its own errors and mistakes, and I think that's the situation we're in right now. And by the way, I do not encourage any kind of a violent uprising of the American people, because if there's one thing this government is really, really good at, it's killing people. But the signs of imminent collapse are all over, whether you liken it to the decline and fall of the Roman Empire or more recently the collapse of the former Soviet Union. You can see the signs everywhere. All we have to do is be patient, and it's going to come crashing down.
Well, I think, like the Soviet Union, I think the computer chip crashed the communist Soviet Union. And as far as, I don't see a political end to what's going on here. I mean, the people that control this country killed their way to the top. If people are just not going to ever do anything about it, I just see them, learning to live in their slavery. I mean, people adapt to the conditions that they're given. I mean, all people are is in debt. I don't see them out there. Protesting about it.
Well,
I mean, look at all the people going to college. They just keep walking into that debt factory. They keep going in every.
Hey! Let me cut in here a little bit. There's a lot of protesting going on out there. The corporate media doesn't want you to see it. We're still hearing about all these protests and riots out there in the California university system. But again, it doesn't serve the agenda of the ruling elite. Therefore, you're not going to be told about it.
All right, Mike. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Mike in Alaska. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I want to mention on the drug stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know how it is in Hawaii, but I think that Alaska is an interesting example of kind of proving where the stuff is really coming from, sort of getting to the bottom of it, because it's actually quite easy to control what comes in here with the limited number of roads and the border with Canada and things like that. There's not a lot of ships going in and out that are, there's some cargo and military stuff, but it's not really, really high volume. But
in the last few years, even before I started listening to your show, there's been a huge uptrend of heroin.
Yep. It's all over the country.
You go down...
Both illegal and prescription opiate addiction, that's the new norm.
Right, and here, you know, if you live out of the city, you need to take your trash to like a transfer site. You throw it in a big bin, and the truck comes and empties it into itself and takes it to the landfill.
Mm-hmm.
And they're always shooting up down at the, we call them the free store, because some people like to go in there and pull things out if someone throws away something that isn't really trash.
Yeah.
We've got all these hoarders and people like that. But, you know, I'm just throwing away my eggshells, and there's someone shooting themselves up or whatever. And I just thought it would be an interesting observation. Places like Hawaii, Alaska, smaller areas are really good to look at to say, okay, if we truly believe that everyone's cooking this on their kitchen stove or whatever the explanation du jour is for where this stuff comes from, you know, we have to look at Afghanistan as far as where's the raw material coming from.
Yes.
You know, those things don't grow here. Okay, so you can use basic logic, and then even if something can be created in the household, or you know, use the matchboxes or whatever they do, and all these other drugs. I don't use them, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you can realize there's just so much of it around that it's not being made in these quantities in this location, and it's also not being driven from, you know, Yukon Territory, Canada, or shipped from Honolulu on a macadamia nut or a coffee, you know, with the good stuff from Hawaii, the good fruits and veggies we need. It's not going on those ships. So where is it coming from?
Well, we don't know that. I mean, especially when you're dealing with a container ship, you don't know what's in every container. There's supposed to be a manifest, but you pay off the right people, especially if you're connected with the CIA, and the stuff comes on in. And getting on back to what was being detailed in America's War on Drugs, there's a lot of airplanes being used, and of course airplanes are very popular up in Alaska to get from point A to point B. But you're absolutely right. Opium abuse, both illegal and prescription, is just exploding in this country. And again, it does appear that much of the raw opium continues to come out of Afghanistan. And there are probably other places as well. I'm sure that over in the Golden Triangle in Burma, they haven't gone out of business over there either. But it really is completely out of control. And again, we have American drug lords. And that was one of the big things that came out of America's War on Drugs, that the drug lords are not all these sweaty men living on mountains in South America. They're right here among us.
Absolutely. One good thing we've got going here is the cannabis and the medical marijuana. I'm not a smoker, but, you know, if you got stage 5 cancer or whatever, or you got a need, or you just want to use it and it's none of my business, I don't mind you doing that. And we have some pretty funny people that will go, you know, into the city councils and things like that and say, you know, you just approved this liquor license in a retirement home or whatever. You know, this is the number one drug. I mean, there's the illegal narcotics and then the pain pills and stuff. There's also alcohol.
Yeah.
And I'm not a prohibition guy, but, you know, you don't need a bar on every corner. And then they just kind of happily go along as, okay, let's approve this transfer. Let's move this here. Let's give the old people some booze. And they immediately passed a tax for the medical marijuana people.
Yes.
Even before they opened up the dispensary or had any business, they said, okay, 5%, 10%, what can we get out of these people? They don't even let them prove, you know, most businesses fail. They don't let them make money a couple of years and then say, well, we'll have a 2% tax. They tried to shut them down from the get-go. So when people point those things out and say, well, actually the number one drug in this town is alcohol, not medical marijuana, you know, the trolling sometimes, that's all you can do, to just kind of laugh at them and say, this is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
That's just my thought on the drug situation, Mike.
Well, again, it's all driven by money, and you have big alcohol, big pharma, big tobacco are all at war for the lion's share of the recreational intoxicant market. and obviously marijuana is their common enemy. So we're going to let you go here and take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to take another phone call. Linda in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Oh, you got the greatest show. You really do. I went on hold when about 3 callers back, the gentleman said, I woke up this morning with the idea, and you were so patient to listen to his idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to add to his idea.
Okay.
I thought he was going to where I'm going to go now, and I think he would like it. I hope maybe he calls you back at some time and let you know if he does. That people save up their coins, like somebody like myself who can't donate to RBN, and puts that into dollars on the 14th of April and sends it to RBN.
I love that idea.
If you support, thank you. Okay, what I called about was the liberal media or whatever kind of media it is that's the mainstream media is pushing this narrative with Obama knowing about the Russian spying in August, I would guess it was.
Yes.
In 2 months before October. Okay, so, and the preposterous notions and things that are being put out there as excuses. Now, if our intelligence agencies informed Obama that there was hacking going on, the immediate responsibility, in my opinion, and I would think that this would be other Americans' opinion, we pay these billions of dollars to these agencies to protect us. So they immediately should have notified every single state on what to do to prevent any further possible hacking or tampering with elections. What they say, somebody said it's because the investigation wasn't done yet of who it was. Well, it doesn't matter who it was. It mattered that they had knowledge that our elections were being tampered with, so they say.
And you're right. There was no reaction to it at all. The dog did not bark.
No, it didn't bark because, you know, we all know why. We know why. We know because it's the whole story is preposterous is the best word I can come up with.
That's a good word. It's a good word.
Okay, and you know, every single thing. Now, if you combine this idea that our intelligence agencies and the President of the United States knew that our elections were being tampered with and did not do anything to prevent that, with the FISA report about the abuses of unmasking and so on and so, everything points back to what has been going on here, and it is devious, and it is just a terrible thing to not transfer power to the elected president, and it's not pointing at Donald Trump. It is not.
No, it isn't, and we've already gotten confirmation that Hillary and Podesta and Obama came up with this Russia hacked the election the night Hillary lost. And they just said, well, we'll say it was Russia. And they were just desperate to find some way to try and undo the election and put in Hillary. And it's failed miserably. And now they're stuck. They have to maintain that lie. In the face of all these people are saying, well, why didn't this happen? Why didn't that happen? We're not seeing any of the actual actions that would suggest this narrative has any truth. There's no proof of the hacking. There's no proof anybody tried to do anything about the hacking. And so all they can do is, they're treading water on this one is what they're doing.
It's really awful. I mean, Comey sits there and testifies, I believe, with the head of the NSA that that this private CrowdStrike did the investigation on the DNC computers,
yes.
And this is when they became sure it was Russia. But now they're telling another story. They knew, President Obama knew months and months and months before. Not just why. I mean, I know Trump likes to tweet this stuff out, but why wasn't something done to protect the people in the election systems of the United States? It's not on Russia to protect us. It's not on anybody trying to hack us.
Well, here's the question behind that. Why don't we have an honest, fair, unriggable election system? The one we have now is wide open to fraud, and now they're going to whine and cry and complain. Thank you for the phone call. Linda, we're going to let you go and take a break for commercials.
Right.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Getting on back to computer stuff here. Very interesting article. This is from Scribblers.com, and it's quoting a report from Online Trust Alliance, and it's pointing out that consumer sites like Twitter and YouTube have some of the best security practices, but most U.S. government websites fail basic cybersecurity tests. They're just not taking care of that stuff. And we have, of course, this story about how computers at the State Department were hacked by pro-ISIS hackers who defaced the websites and put up whatever it was they were going to put up over there. Now, Linksys has issued a security advisory in response to the revelations of CIA exploitation. And if you think your router firmware has been compromised by the CIA, and probably a lot of it has, there is a firmware update available at linksys.com/support. Do you remember the Intel Pentium chip when it first came on out? It was this amazing chip and was put into a lot of computers, went on out there, and all of a sudden somebody discovered it actually had a flaw in the hardware, which was producing mathematics errors, and they had to go with a software patch and work around. You know, once it's in the hardware, that's basically it, which is why most modern chips are now coded with what's called microcode. And what that means is you've got your application level where your tools are being made, then there's the operating system, then there's the BIOS, and then you get to the CPU, and the CPU has its own programming language called microcode. So if the chip goes out there with a problem, they can alter the microcode. Turns out that's going to be a very, very good thing because Intel's Skylake and Kaby Lake CPUs apparently have a critical hyper-threading flaw. And apparently the word has already gone on out to people who are using these high-end chips. Turn off the hyper-threading because it can just go into complete meltdown, damage your software, damage your data. And you can turn the feature off in the system BIOS. And apparently this is affecting the Xeon V5, Xeon V6. So, again, the stuff gets sold out there before they're really sure it is going to work here. Now, over in Germany, you would think the police there would be out there chasing down migrants who are committing rapes and burglaries and so forth and so on. Well, you'd be wrong, because apparently German police raided 36 homes looking for people that said something mean online. Oh my goodness, they said a nasty online. Send the cops after them. And aren't you glad now the Supreme Court has ruled there is no hate speech exception to the First Amendment? You can say whatever you want. Again, courtesy, respect, but yeah, you can. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Listen, I have a quick comment. I saw an episode on the History Channel about opium. And, you learn something new every day, right? Yes. I learned that Alexander the Great gave opium to his soldiers so they could keep marching. And my question is this. Alexander the Great died young.
Yes.
Did he use it, and he probably died of an overdose? What do you think?
Well, until they find his body, they're not going to be able to find out now. But, yeah, drugs were big business back there. Alexander the Great, on the night before a battle, would throw bales of marijuana onto the soldiers' campfire, get them all relaxed and mellow.
Okay. All right. Yeah, the guy was way ahead of his time. He was a genius, military genius.
He certainly was, and he was very aggressive. But again, when you look at the part of the world where he was, opium was commonplace, marijuana was commonplace. They were the drugs of the day. The reason there has been so much bloodshed around that eastern end of the Mediterranean was that was the transit point for Turkish opium to go south into Africa and Egypt, various other things coming on back there. By the way, they have actually found in the mummies of the pharaohs traces of cocaine. And of course, then as now, the only place you can get it is Central and South America. So that right there pretty much proves that the Egyptians were crossing the Atlantic long before Leif Erikson and Christopher Columbus did.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks a lot, Tony. We're going to let you go here. Getting on back to the news. Now, down in Miami-Dade, the police were planning this wide area surveillance system where they were basically going to have these loitering aircraft overhead with high-resolution cameras and wide-angle lenses just watching. And the citizens of Dade County said absolutely not. There was a huge outcry that these cameras were peeking into people's backyards where people may be doing things that were perfectly legal to do, but they don't want them on camera, such as ladies sunbathing or things like that. And so the Florida cops have now had to shut it down. We've reached a point now where it's time to start complaining about what's going on and how we're being treated. It really is. Now, story that is coming out of Daily Mail in Great Britain, and this really illustrates the decline in education all over the world, the dumbing down of society. Apparently over at St. Albans High School for Girls, Jenny Brown, who's head of that school, is saying that the General Certificate of Secondary Education, basically the certificate that says you passed the education, that the number of subjects ought to be cut from the present 11 subjects down to 5, saying that it was making the students too stressed out to have to study for so many subjects here. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I'm just calling to emphasize the interesting point that that for months and months Trump was not under investigation, and yet they would not release, the media, the FBI, everybody would not release the information that he was not under investigation. And now that Hillary and Podesta and Rice and all these other people are under investigation, they're not saying anything at all.
No, they're not, except for the New York Post and Fox News, the fact that Bernie, Hillary, and Loretta Lynch are all currently under FBI investigation. It's a non-story. You don't need to know that stuff. You're supposed to love Hillary. You're supposed to believe Loretta Lynch. Now, I understand the situation with Bernie Sanders may relate more to his wife than to him, so let's be a little bit fair on that. But, yeah, absolutely, we're seeing the deep state moving to protect its own.
Mike, I've been of the opinion from the beginning that this whole thing with Russia was because Obama was so absolutely lawlessly surveilling everybody, including like using the IRS against his political opponents, using the intelligence agencies against his political opponents, and then once he realized that he was going to lose, and that this information would fall to Trump, then all at once, the Russians come into play. And he had to go back and say, oh, you know, it happened way back when, you know, because of the FISA wars. And it was even, obviously, it was even before that. But they started to get worried with the FISA warrants.
Yes.
Because they didn't do anything at all.
Well, the FISA warrant was obtained on the basis of that Russia dossier, which we know now was a complete fabrication from top to bottom.
That was their cover story, Mike.
Yep.
You know, that was their cover story. And so now, hopefully these investigations, and of course the media, who campaigned, gave them huge money, gave Hillary all their endorsements and everything bad about Trump, everything good about Hillary, you know, they're complicit. They're glad to go along with this ridiculous false narrative. It's just, it's an exercise in absurdity, really.
Mm-hmm. It really is, absolutely. Anything else?
No, that's it. I just wanted to get that off my chest.
All right. Well, Peter, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now, getting on over to the Health Ranger, we all know that the water crisis in Flint, Michigan made the issue of less than pure, clean water coming out of our faucets a national issue. And that was exacerbated by the fact that further investigation has shown it's not a problem that is confined to Flint, Michigan. It's all over Michigan, a lot of other places. Frankly, if you're concerned, I would suggest strongly you go to YouTube. You can get for about $20, $30 a water safety testing kit for your home. We had one here in Hawaii. As it turns out, except for the exceptional hardness, which makes sense, we're sucking it out from inside a dead volcano, we have very good water coming out of our faucets, but a lot of people don't. Health Ranger put up a list of test results for 364 more water samples from areas across, and showing the numbers are higher in many cases than the limits allowed by the USDA. And so it's a widespread problem. Now, an investigation by USA Today identified almost 2,000 additional water systems in all 50 states where testing has shown excessive levels of lead contamination over the past 4 years. Now, what are the symptoms of lead contamination? Disorientation, loss of cognitive ability. Seem to be a lot of crazy people running around this country right now. I wonder what the lead contamination for the water in Washington, D.C. is. That's a good question here. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Mateus in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I wonder what the lead contamination was in the Roman Empire.
Oh, it was horrible. It was a horrible problem. Not only were they using lead for the plumbing, it was used to make dishes and goblets. I mean, when you're talking about the excesses of Nero and Caligula, they were clearly suffering from lead poisoning toward the end there.
Yeah, so just another correlation there to that apt analogy.
Yep.
Hey, I have two inventions and one something about money I wanted to mention. So one invention is for your show. How about if you have two towers and each of those are simultaneously setting up your connections for your program through Skype, but one of them is muted, and it could just be either manual or a simple program that if anything ever goes wrong with one of them, the other one just kicks in, unmutes.
Well, I would love to have a system in duplicate. That is impractical for me right now, both because of the financial costs and just space limited. Now, I do have a spare. Let me back up here a little bit. I have my main desktop machine here, where I have the web development area and everything, and I do run Skype on a separate standalone laptop for which there is a backup.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how easy it would be to make it two Skypes going at the same time.
Well, there's really
one of them muted so you don't get an echo.
Well, I don't know that RBN would be able to handle that. It would certainly limit our ability to take calls and guests on that second Skype channel. But again, in this case, with this other laptop, it's basically swap over two cords and the Ethernet connection, and we're up and running.
Okay, cool. Hey, so the other invention was regarding Trump's initiative for infrastructure expansion in the area of air traffic control.
Yes.
So this would be a perfect application for VR. So the air traffic controller, sits in a chair with the VR on, and what he sees is it looks like he's seen in like an inner tube, like a little tiny UFO, and the perimeter of the tube is a compass, and basically, it just reconstructs the environment. He can look down and see the Earth way down there, and he can look up and see the airplanes, and that would take away a lot of the stress that causes these poor people to crack under pressure.
Well, I disagree because, first of all, modern air traffic control radar The display is already about as simple as can be made, and I think turning it into VR and adding perspective and everything back into it, it's going to actually make it harder to interpret that information. The degree of pressure has to do with the fact that there is a lot of traffic and not enough air traffic controllers. The system needs to be redesigned, starting with the terminal control area itself, breaking it into smaller and smaller zones with a separate air traffic controller managing each zone, and that would reduce the workload.
Well, like I said before, you're a tough nut to crack. Okay, third time lucky. Let's see if I'm lucky here. It's the third idea. Okay, so the reason that you do not have to pay your wife to take out the garbage or to pick up the kids from school is because you love your wife and money is not required to get the other person to do something for you. But if you don't love somebody, that's where money comes in, where you're like, I want you to fix my toilet, but I don't love you. Oh, okay, here's some money. Someone else will help you out in the future. And so basically money is a way that we coordinate people that we don't love doing stuff for us. And which kind of brings into a question of why do we have to pay our kids an allowance to do chores. But the main point
hang on here. I mean, yeah, obviously that's the core of commerce. Buying goods and services from other people with the money. The reason you give your children an allowance is to give them experience learning how to handle and manage their money and correct some bad habits before they leave the home and get into trouble out there in the world. That's the reason you give your kids an allowance.
Yeah, that's true. I wasn't too serious about that part. But so basically, this gets into like a theory I have about morality of wealth. And so if you have a whole bunch of money that you inherited, for example, or found or stole, what that means is that thousands of other people are going to be serving you. And you didn't really do anything that justifies the effort that everyone's making for you. You kind of have to imagine the world like we all do the same things that we normally do, except just magically the money is not there, but we're all still doing the same stuff. It's all who is serving who. And so when the Federal Reserve just prints up a whole bunch of fake money, what that's doing is it's causing the masses of the people to have to serve them.
It's a system of enslavement.
Wherever that money goes.
It's a system of enslavement. We've got to take a break for commercials. Mateus, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. We'll be back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. I'm watching on Fox News, and they're still going back and forth over the GOP health care bill. Obviously, the Democrats like things just the way they are. So do the health insurance companies that wrote the Affordable Care Act, and they're out there just screaming and crying that children are going to be dying in their beds if we touch Obamacare. It really is turning into a circus. And like the Russia allegations, I'm getting sick and tired of just hearing about this stuff. Now then, little kudos for SpaceX, who managed to do a double launch and recovery in 48 hours. And they're using recycled Falcon 9s. So that they're starting to really do a good job. I wonder if SpaceX would be interested in working on the idea of some kind of a garbage collector for low Earth orbit, because especially if the U.S. is going to start going to war in low Earth orbit, one will eventually be needed. Little warning article coming out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. Apparently there's a report out signed by 200 scientists warning that the antibacterial chemicals found in soap, lunch boxes, and exercise mats might be causing more harm than good. Especially harming pregnant women, and even worse, apparently these antibacterial chemicals really aren't all that good at killing the germs. So, again, they just put the stuff out here. Another story about statins. We've heard bad things about them. A recent study by researchers from the Penn State College of Medicine is basically saying the use of statins may increase a person's susceptibility to Parkinson's disease. And finally, kind of an interesting story of conspecific teaching in the wild. Apparently up in the Bering Sea, the killer whales have all of a sudden realized that those fishing trawlers dragging these miles and miles of line with hooks on them are a great way to get a free meal. And more of the whales are beginning to actually chase those boats and simply snack off whatever is caught on the hooks. And it's a big problem for the fishermen. They don't know what they're going to do. But the whales are coming on up there, and they're just having themselves a little snack and ski-daddling all the way. Apparently over in Oregon, they actually had a bill, Senate Bill 494. Thank goodness it was voted down. But apparently the bill, if it had passed, would allow dementia and mentally ill patients to be starved to death. And the Oregon Right to Life group declared victory, and yeah, absolutely, that was a victory. The fact that somebody even considered a solution to mental illness and dementia to starve somebody to death, it's one of the most painful ways you can go. I mean, what are these politicians thinking? I thought Oregon was this laid-back, easy-to-get-along with place. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do Jim Goddard's show up in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please donate if you can. Take what you learn here from the radio show and the website. Share it with everybody that you know. We need to start waking people up to the true nature of the government of this land. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.